Okay, it's all right. It's recording and ew, it's gonna transcribe. So
Okay.
all right.
Okay.
Go.
Well, my name is Jessica Anderson, and I'm actually a student at University of Phoenix. I'm in the process of getting my master's in public health, and part of that program is to help with creating an initiative for public health. And so I was introduced to Ryan and extremely grateful for that introduction because she allowed me the opportunity to help with this specific program, the Domestic Abuse Survivor Council, which I just noticed on my screen, council is not spelled correctly. But I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining and actually being there and participating in this for me. So domestic violence is a widespread public health issue. And I apologize, I actually have COVID right now, so I'm gonna try and get through this. I'm so sorry. So if I
You
start coughing,
sound great. You
okay.
sound great.
Okay. Um, Survivors often face many barriers when seeking help, including stigma, lack of resources, and systemic challenges. This council was established to address these gaps by fostering survivor-led advocacy and informing service improvements. This presentation is meant to provide an overview of the Council's origins, the needs it addresses, approaches, and the outcomes aimed to achieve. I'll be discussing all of the following: purpose, origins, needs, service area, target population, assessment, procedures, research strategies, data collection, project outcome, implications, improvement strategies, and future direction. Your support and collaboration are key to ensuring its success. The Domestic Violence Survivor Council was developed in response to a growing need for the survivor-centered advocacy in Nogales, Arizona. The region has experienced significant challenges related to domestic violence, with many survivors facing barriers to accessing resources due to economic and systemic factors. The council was formed through a collaborative effort between Mariposa Community Health Center, local advocacy groups, and survivors themselves, with a goal to ensure that survivor experiences directly inform policy and service improvements. One key factor leading to the creation of this council was the recognition that traditional service models often do not fully address the lived realities of the survivors. Research shows that survivor-led initiatives improve engagement, trust, and program effectiveness. By incorporating the voice of those with the lived experience, the organization can better tailor support services and drive systemic change in Nogales. While Nogales has a strong mobile community-based advocacy program that provides case management services, the reality is that given the challenges of rural health, resources remain limited. Some of the key challenges survivors face include limited shelter availability and financial instability that make it difficult to leave abusive situations. Many survivors also experience transportation barriers, preventing them from accessing resources located outside their immediate communities. There is also a significant underreporting issue due to fear of retaliation. Santa Cruz County has one of the highest rates of domestic violence related emergency calls in Arizona. Yet these numbers do not capture the full scope of the problem because many of the survivors never seek formal help. Given these limitations, it's crucial to establish a survivor-led council where individuals can directly inform the development and improvement of services. By integrating their voices into decision-making processes, we can ensure that services are accessible, effective, and truly responsive to the community, to the needs of the community. The Domestic Violence Survivor Council services Nogales, Arizona, and the surrounding communities in Santa Cruz County. Nogales is a rural border community with a population of approximately 20,000 residents, and it faces challenges when it comes to domestic violence intervention and support services. One of the defining characteristics of Nogales is its predominantly Hispanic and Latino population, which makes up over 95% of the community. This demographic makeup means that culturally competent services are essential to effectively addressing the domestic violence. Many survivors in Nogales may face additional barriers due to immigration status and financial instability, all of which can make accessing resources even more difficult. Another important factor is the rural nature of Santa Cruz County. Unlike larger metropolitan areas that have multiple domestic violence shelters and advocacy organizations, Nogales has limited service providers, and survivors may need to travel long distances to access support. Transportation barriers and financial constraints often prevent them from seeking the help outside their immediate community, which reinforces the need for strong, locally available survivor led advocacy and support. Nogales thrives on community driven initiative. This council allows the program to tailor resources specifically to the needs of survivors in this region, ensuring that their voices are at the forefront of the program development and policy changes. This council is designed to center the voices of the survivors, ensuring that their experiences directly shape the support system that they rely on. By doing so, the goal is to improve the effectiveness of domestic violence programs by incorporating survivor feedback, enhance access to culturally competent and community-led support services, foster trust between survivors, service providers, and policymakers, increase awareness and education about domestic violence within the Nogales community, and the target population serves survivors of domestic violence, particularly those in rural and underserved communities in Santa Cruz County. However, it also engages a broad range of stakeholders, including service providers, advocacy organizations, healthcare professionals, and law enforcement agencies that interact with the survivors. Community organizations such as nonprofit and grassroots groups dedicated to social justice and family welfare, local policymakers, government officials who influence domestic violence policies and funding allocations. The council will play a vital role in shaping a more responsive and survivor-driven domestic violence support network within the region. To ensure the Domestic Violence Survivor Council effectively addresses the needs of the survivors in Nogales, we conducted a comprehensive assessment to identify key gaps in service and understand the lived experience of the survivors. The methods that were used were survivor surveys. We distributed anonymous surveys to individuals who have accessed domestic violence services in Nogales. These surveys gathered insight on barriers to seeking help, the effectiveness of existing services, and areas where survivors felt unsupported. Focus groups were held with survivors to explore their experiences in depth. These sessions provided a safe space for survivors to share their perspectives on service accessibility, cultural consideration, and gaps in current advocacy efforts. There were stakeholder interviews where we engaged with service providers, law enforcement, healthcare professionals, and community leaders to gain a broader understanding of the systemic challenges affecting these survivors. There was a community needs assessment where we reviewed existing data on domestic violence incidents, shelter availability, and socioeconomic factors impacting survivors in Santa Cruz County. The key findings: there is a strong demand for peer-led advocacy as survivors find support from others with similar experiences more impactful. This assessment confirmed that a survivor-led council would be a valuable addition to existing services by bridging the gap between survivors and service providers. By ensuring survivors' voices are heard, we can develop more effective, culturally responsive, and accessible support systems in Nogales. To ensure the Domestic Violence Survivor Council is grounded in evidence-based practices, we utilize several research strategies to guide its development. Our approach combined a review of existing literature, analysis of best practices, and direct engagement with the Nogales community to understand how survivor-led models can be effectively implemented. Through these research strategies, we built a framework that is not only informed by evidence, but also deeply rooted in the realities of survivors in Nogales. This ensures that our council remains relevant, effective, and sustainable. In order to ensure that the Domestic Violence Survivor Council is addressing the real needs of the Nogales community, we engaged in a thorough data collection process. This included a combination of qualitative and quantitative methods to gather insight from survivors, service providers, and key stakeholders. The survivor surveys: we conducted a confidential survey with domestic violence survivors who had accessed service. These surveys helped us identify common challenges, barriers, and areas where service could be improved. Some of the barriers were the transportation challenges and financial dependence on the abusers. The need for survivor leadership, a reoccurring trend in the data, was the importance of survivor involvement in the program development. It's important to highlight the tangible impact we have had on survivors, service providers, and the broader community. One of the primary goals of this initiative was to provide survivors with a structured platform to share their experience and actively participate in shaping services. Through focus groups, surveys, and direct engagement, we successfully built a foundation where survivors feel heard and valued. Local organizations have expanded access to legal advocacy services and financial literacy workshops, recognizing that economic dependence is one of the most significant barriers to leaving an abusive relationship. Additionally, providers are incorporating more trauma-informed practices, ensuring that interactions with the survivors are more supportive and empowering. By engaging with policymakers, law enforcement, and community health organizations, the Council has helped increase awareness of domestic violence challenges in Nogales. While we have made progress, there are still areas that require further development. For instance, survivors continue to face housing instability, and there is a need for more long-term mental health support. These challenges reinforce the importance of sustaining and expanding the Council's efforts. The outcomes so far demonstrate that the survivors are actively involved in decision-making, services become more responsive and effective. Moving forward, we will continue to build on these successes and address the gaps that remain. It is clear that survivor input is not just valuable, it is essential for improving domestic violence response systems in Nogales. This council serves as a direct bridge between survivors and service providers, ensuring that policies and programs are informed by lived experiences rather than assumptions. One of the most immediate implications is the shift towards the more trauma-informed care. This means training frontline workers, law enforcement, and healthcare providers on how to interact with survivors in a way that promotes safety, trust, and empowerment. Another major impact of this initiative is improved coordination among service providers. Traditionally, domestic violence service operates in silos, making it difficult for survivors to navigate the system. By incorporating survivor feedback, we can streamline referral process, enhance collaboration between agencies, and ensure the survivors receive comprehensive continuous support. On a larger scale, the Council's findings can guide policy recommendations at both the local and state level. For example, if survivors report that economic barriers are preventing them from leaving an abusive relationship, stakeholders can advocate for increased funding for financial assistance programs, job training initiatives, and affordable housing options. Data from the Council can also be leveraged to secure grants and funding for expanding services. Finally, this initiative underscores the importance of survivor leadership in shaping domestic violence interventions. When survivors are given a seat at the table, they become powerful advocates for change, not just for themselves, but for others who may still be trapped in dangerous situations. Ultimately, the Survivor Council has the potential to transform how domestic violence is addressed in the community, ensuring that services are not only available, but also effective, culturally relevant, and survivor centered. These strategies are based on survivor feedback, best practices in trauma-informed care, and lessons learned from similar initiatives in other communities. Pushing for increased funding for domestic violence shelters and outreach programs, strengthening legal protection for survivors, including improved restraining orders and enforcement, advocating for policies that reduce barriers in healthcare across Nogales for access for survivors is also key. By implementing these strategies, we can create a stronger survivor-centered support system in Nogales, ensuring that those who experience domestic violence have resources, safety, and empowerment they need to rebuild their lives. Moving forward, collaboration among stakeholders, ongoing evaluation, and survivor-led decision-making will also be key in sustaining these efforts. As we look toward the future of the Domestic Violence Survivor Council, stakeholder involvement will be critical to ensuring its sustainability and impact. Collaboration among service providers, policymakers, law enforcement, healthcare professionals, and the survivors themselves will help strengthen the Council's influence and expand its reach. By prioritizing stakeholder collaboration and securing sustainable funding, we can ensure that the Domestic Violence Survivor Council remains a vital resource in Nogales. Ultimately, our goal is to create a lasting impact by shaping survivor-centered policies, improving services, and fostering communities where survivors feel empowered and supported. In conclusion, the Domestic Violence Survivor Council represents a crucial step in improving survivor-led advocacy and service delivery in Nogales. Throughout this presentation, we have explored the Council's origins, the significant needs it addresses, the methods used to assess and implement our initiatives, and the expected and achieved outcomes. I want to thank each of you for taking the time out of your day and the commitment that you have in addressing domestic violence in the community. And now, if there's any feedback.
Awesome job, Jessica. Really good.
Good.
All right. I'll open it if anyone here has a question or feedback, something. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, comments. What about comments?
I like how she presents it, really well presented.
Well presented. It's an interesting project, I think, for us, because we have our group, having all these questions like addressed from that survivor's perspective is really important. It's one of those things where, like, and Steph, you know, because you work with the substance use world, that peer aspect and having like the lived experience.
Oh, yeah.
Is
super important.
Yeah.
And also beneficial.
Yeah, it really makes programs more impactful, and it changes like the ways that things can be done. As Jessica mentioned, like the fact that the Survivors Council is able to talk about how services are delivered, whether it's in Mariposa or how they interact with police or DCS or other agencies. All that information goes to the multidisciplinary task force team, and we're able to take that as we develop the protocols for the county. So it's just excellent. So thank you, Jessica, for the presentation and for all the work that you've been doing.
Thank you for letting me actually be a part of it. It actually, on a personal level, meant a great deal to me. And, you know, I have a certain background, so it really did mean a lot to me to be a part of it.
No, for sure. And I think that's what helped make this project successful. Just because you have that, I mean, that connection and stuff. Me and you talked about them in the past. It's important to care about the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna hit stop recording. Let me see how to do that. Stop.
Thank you all for being so patient with me.